Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Karen Mason, and I am today's City of Eugene staff representative for this meeting. Before the chairs convene the meeting, I have a few reminders and introductory words. First, here is the agenda for tonight, which I believe Cass will be sharing. And the purpose of the Active Transportation Committee is 1, to advise the City of Eugene staff and community organizations and partners on implementation of Eugene's pedestrian and bicycle strategic plan. 2, to represent community and constituent interests in transportation planning decisions. And 3, to provide feedback to staff on projects relating to walking and bicycling. Eugene City staff will consider recommendations from the ATC along with input from other members of the public during decision-making processes. Please keep in mind that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to YouTube. All verbal and written commentary will be held in the public record. Today's meeting will begin with a 10-minute public comment period. The public comment period is an opportunity for individuals to speak to the Active Transportation Committee on transportation-related issues. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak. To indicate that you would like to speak, please use the raise hand feature within Zoom now. The chairs will call on you when it is your turn, and staff will unmute your microphone at that time. When it is your time to speak, please give your name, city of residence, and for Eugene residents, your ward or neighborhood. At any time during the meeting, you are welcome to ask a question using the Q&A function or use the chat feature for discussion with other attendees and committee members. Comments will be monitored and recorded. Anyone making inappropriate comments will be restricted from the live portion of the meeting. Questions will be answered at the chair's discretion. As a reminder, civil speech supports everyone in feeling comfortable sharing their perspectives and opinions. Let's give one another the respect of courteous and civil speech tonight. And with that, I'll hand it over to the chairs to convene the meeting.
Thanks, Karen. I hope everyone's been able to stay safe and healthy the last couple of days. We're going to start with public comments. If you have something to say or questions to ask, I would encourage you to raise your hand. Looks like we have 7 attendees, and I see 2 hands already from Duncan and Webb and Harry.
Yes, this is Duncan Rhodes in Jefferson Westside neighborhood. And I have a comment on the path etiquette campaign. I feel that the stated 20-mile-per-hour speed limit on paths is way faster than should be allowed. You can severely startle a pedestrian going past them at 12, much less 20. And I have observed people speeding along the path and quite decidedly frightening the pedestrians on the path. So I would suggest that the path limit be lowered to possibly 12 miles an hour, and 20 miles an hour is way too high. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Duncan. I believe Webb was next. There we go.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak. Webb Sussman, Ward 1. Some observations and then some questions. First of all, I'd like to agree with Mr. Rhodes that I think that the speed of 20 is way too high. I'd be comfortable with 15. I think 12 is a little low, but 15 would be fine. On the other hand, I'm seeing motorized traffic on the riverbank trails, on the Amazon Creek Trail, and on the lanes on 13th that are routinely hitting 20 to 25 miles an hour and blowing through everybody. And I think that's not acceptable. Some additional observations about the lanes on 13th. I'm sorry, I'm going to read. So I've observed early in the morning people panhandling and camping actually camping in the lanes. There was a fellow who had a tent set up in the lane just west of Willamette Street the other day. I've also observed the lanes being used by motorized traffic. I've already discussed that. I've also observed that the lanes on 13th tend to seem to trap inexperienced riders. They are pinned in that lane and they don't, they have difficulty figuring out how to make turn movements if the turn movement isn't at an intersection. Next observation is people camping on the Amazon Creek Trail and to a lesser extent on the two river trails. In the case of the Amazon Creek, literally camping on the trail, which I found very interesting, going through there at 20 miles an hour or so on a bike coming into a downhill under an underpass. I was cruising at 15. I hit the downhill to go into the underpass and discovered a tent under the bridge. And that was a little unsettling. The bike parking at Valley River Center appears to be hidden from the public in several instances, and B, isn't secured. The bike, I can actually pick the bike racks up off the concrete and, where I have a mind, throw them into the back of a pickup truck. They're not bolted down. Finally, on the pedestrian side of the house, we continue to have sidewalk issues on the west side, particularly in the neighborhood near, roughly bounded from 18th up to 27th. And from Chambers west to Oak Patch. The sidewalks are intermittent. They're in poor condition. We have school children trying to navigate these things, and it's a safety issue, among other things. That's about it for me. Thank you very much for your time and your courtesy. And if you have any questions to ask me, feel free. And that's it.
Thank you, Webb. And now we have Harry.
Thank you, Daniel. Can you hear me? Okay, looks like I'm on. So I actually had a second comment here, but based on those first two, and regarding speed, I think there's a clear distinction that could be made between human-powered vehicles and motor-assisted. And I think to limit human-powered to anything below 20, I'm not I'm an avid cyclist, but I'm not training for any races, and I can routinely cruise at 15. So to make it lower than that seems like you'd be impeding on the use of serious cyclists on our mixed-use paths. And I would ask, are we going to set up dedicated bike lanes, off-road bike paths for those cyclists to ride on that would mirror what's already available? But my concern is, speaking of paths, on the West Bank path, I'm in the River Road neighborhood, and there is some developments planned in the transportation plan or bicycle pedestrian plan for extending the West Bank path where roads are currently used. And I would personally like to suggest that we look at ways to make those roads that are currently being used better able to handle the bicycle traffic rather than paving more of the riverfront. And I've talked to some of my neighbors in the River Road area, and I talked to the River Road Community Organization about perhaps inviting the committee on a bike tour to look at some of these areas firsthand. So I'd like to gauge interest and see if that is something you all would be amicable to. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Harry. All right, seeing no other public comment, let's move on to approving the July meeting notes.
I have a comment before we move to approve the notes. It indicates that I was in attendance in July and I was not. And so I don't want to take credit and or blame for anything that happened at the meeting.
Can we just blame you anyway, Josh?
Sure, but not in the minutes.
Oh,
In your
okay.
heart is fine with me.
Okay, so I guess I would ask that somebody move to approve the minutes with the addendum that Josh be struck from the attendees list.
I'll move to approve those meeting minutes from last month without Josh's attendance.
I'll second.
All in favor, thumbs up. Opposed, thumbs down. Okay. So next we have transportation options, strategies for a growing Eugene. We're going to hear from, I believe, oh boy, where is everybody? Okay.
Actually,
It
Dan,
says
tonight.
Larissa, but yeah, it's just you guys.
Yeah, it is just me tonight. Larissa is out sick, and so I'm covering things tonight. I am going to do my best to cover this topic, but I also know that there may be some questions that I'm not able to answer. And if so, we will just, record those questions and follow up with you.
Perfect.
Okay, hold on just a moment. Let me go ahead and set this up. And I have to ask, because I can't see it, are you seeing my desktop or are you seeing the presentation?
Your desktop. We don't. It's not in presentation mode.
Okay.
But if you have that issue, we can get by with seeing it that way.
Okay. All right.
Now we're seeing we see the presenter mode, so we see the notes.
Oh, no. Okay, let me try to switch this here. My apologies. All right, how about that?
We still see the note and next slide of you.
Wow, okay. Well, that is unfortunate. Okay, I'm just going to disconnect my second screen because there's something going on between the two of them and see if I can do this with just one. Thanks for your patience here. All right. All good?
There we go.
Okay. Well, we'll see how I do without my notes. Haha. Okay. So this project is called Transportation Options Strategies for Growing Eugene. And it is a mouthful. And the project is, I guess it's appropriately titled for the mouthful of a project that this is, which I'll explain more about. I think a few of you have been in some focus groups that we've had. We've had a couple of rounds of focus groups pertaining to this project. And so this will be some repetition for you. And for others, there is a lot of information here, but hang in there with me and don't be shy about asking questions. I'll have a few spots throughout the presentation to ask questions. And of course, anything afterwards, after I finish is welcome as well. So this is what we're going to cover here, an overview. I'm going to show you some draft recommendations that our primary consultant, Nelson Nygaard, has put together. And so you can get a sense for where this project is going. And I'm hoping to get some feedback from you all about whether you have some ideas that you want to contribute, whether you're feeling that this is going in the right direction, and just simply receive guidance from you as a staff person. And I'll also cover where we're at and the next steps. So just by way of context, this project aims to address a number of things. Eugene's mode split goals for the future that were outlined in our transportation system plan, which include tripling the number of trips or the percentage of trips by walking, biking, and transit by 2035. So there's some ambitious goals that we are working towards. We've got climate action plan goals that we're also working on through this project. And we're also thinking about the work that is happening as developers are building throughout the city, how we can successfully integrate transportation options into the construction from the get-go. So it's not something that we're adding later. Also, by way of context, some of you may have heard about the Portland Eco Rule, and that rule in Portland has been going for a number of years now. And the idea is that for employers that have 100 or more employees at a work site, they're required to provide transportation options, programs, and infrastructure. However, they have options for how they want to do it or how they decide to do it. But generally speaking, what they're trying to do and required to do in Portland is to really inspire and work with their employees to try more sustainable options for transportation. And this rule is being taken up by the state and likely going to be expanded statewide, probably by about 2022. And so with that coming, the city of Eugene is getting ready for that. We're also thinking about all of these things above here. There is a great video on our website that intros this topic, and we'll see if I can get this to play here.
Eugene is a growing community. By 2035, we expect to have 42,000 more residents. This means more people will...
Yeah, we're hearing, but not seeing.
Oh, the technology is going really well today. Okay, so we've got this great video on our website. I encourage you to check it out, but I'm going to cover what it covers right here. So here are some basics about this project that the video covers. It is transportation option strategies for growing Eugene, is trying to make active transportation choices more convenient in order to reduce drive-alone trips. And it's doing that through looking at employee commutes, multifamily housing, and new construction. So when I said this is a big title for a really big project, each of those areas could be projects in and of themselves, and they rightfully are. They are all combined under this umbrella for one very big piece of work. So within the new construction area, we're looking at parking reductions that developers ask for, and what we might be able to ask for in return based on that. And it also looks at when there's new development, we estimate the road impact, the traffic impact. And so it looks at that area as well. So even within new construction, there are two projects, sub-projects underneath that. So in terms of how this project meets city goals, it works, of course, to attract and retain employees. We really want to provide options for people that no matter where they are in the city, that they can get around, and have it be something that tenants and employees are excited to have. We want it to improve community health, of course, promote sustainability, reduce some of the traffic on our roads. The city is growing rapidly, and we are expected to add about 42,000 new residents in the coming years, in the coming 12 years. And so in order to not have our roads be filled with cars, we need to start providing some other options around the city, and really supporting those options at places of employment and at housing, multifamily housing developments, and in new developments around town. Of course, we want to enhance equity with this project and decrease development costs. Of course, a reduction in parking can also reduce rent, and housing is a big topic here locally. So here's the kind of overall schedule of engagement. This project has been going on since September of 2020, and we've had a few rounds of stakeholder engagement. And during that time, we've focused on defining the problem, getting clear about all those topic areas and what it is that we need to both establish how it is set up locally and how others might be doing it that we could learn from. So we've looked at what the current practices are, and we have gone out into a number of cities around the country and talked to their staff about how they're doing things as well. On the project website, there is a report of best practices that we've gained from all of those conversations and the research that we've done. And then we're also looking at identifying issues and opportunities in the processes that we already have here within the city, making some recommendations for how we can change that and how we can meet some of the needs of the future with our growing population and the coming eco rule from Portland expanding out statewide. The final report is coming from our consultant in the next month or two. And so we are at a time period where we're providing feedback on the direction that they are going, and that feedback can get folded into what Nelson Nygaard is returning to us. So here are some of the draft recommendations. There are a few overarching principles. We need a phased approach
this is a lot of work. We can't do it all at once. So we're talking about an action plan. We want to reach a lot of people, but we can't cover everything. So how do we cover as many places, projects, employees as we can? We want to scale down the requirements so that smaller projects or smaller employees don't have the same requirements as larger ones. And we also want to provide options for employers to be working with their employees for new development, for multifamily housing. All of these, each of those is different. And then even within multifamily housing, of course, you know, one building is located in the WIT and another building might be located in, Santa Clara area. And they have different programs that will work in those different areas. So for existing employers and employee commutes, what we're looking at is potentially, again, going back to the Portland Eco rule, starting with employers that have 100 or more employees. In the first couple of years, the second couple of years, beginning to look at employers with 75 or more employees. And then finally going down to 50 employees and downtown. We're looking, of course, at the downtown area, even though we do have a lot of small employers and small businesses in downtown. But the reason for that is, of course, downtown has a lot of transportation options that would fit very, very well into a program like this. And it's pretty common in a lot of cities that the downtown core might have different requirements or increased requirements because they have so many options. So here is an example of how this could apply. So this could be, Peace Health Sacred Heart Medical Center. This is not, want to underscore that this is just an imaginary case, that we would provide a whole menu of options, more than what you see here. And this could be an example of what an employer might choose to offer their employees to encourage them to choose more sustainable options for transportation to get to work. So some of these in tier 0, these would be things that are required for everybody across the board. A transportation coordinator, so somebody who is just the point person for all of the transportation work. Transportation marketing, which could be provided by the city, the materials for that. Transportation survey, which would be conducted by the city every year or two, and to get a sense for how people are currently traveling and to set goals based on that. So covered or sheltered bike parking, telecommuting options, on-site car share, these are all possibilities for what an employer could offer. And they're grouped into tiers with increasing complexity to make sure that within each menu, and an employer would have to choose a certain number, and that way they don't always choose the easiest of a single list, but they have to choose within a number of separated lists. Hopefully that makes sense, but we can talk through that. Oh, shoot. So this of course, raises some questions for how we define downtown. And give me just a moment. I seem to be missing a slide. Okay. So this raises questions about how do we define downtown? Because if we are talking about casting a net over downtown to include in this project, then what does downtown include? Are we talking about what is in the Downtown Neighborhood Association? What is in kind of the downtown parking district? How do we define those boundaries? So that difference could result in some really different numbers. And the downtown goal is also to include the University of Oregon within that. So in doing that, that of course expands the number of people who could be downtown. Hearing this, are there programs or options you think would move the needle or that you would like to see on a menu of options that employers could choose from?
You're welcome. You have a lot of good things here. Something that occurred to me would be showers on site.
On-site showers, yes. Anything else that would be important? That list is only a sample, and I'm not showing you the full list because it is very extensive. And it's split up into different categories for all the different menu types that are necessary for this project. So it's complex, but we do want to be sure that if there are ideas that ATC has in terms of what would be helpful for employers to be providing their employees, that we hear those ideas and relay that info to Nelson Nygaard. If there are other ideas, I'd like to hear them.
Looks like Andrew's hand.
I guess to your questions there, like what kind of support should the city provide? And I have gotten a few questions recently from employers about my work at LTD. And one thing that I think would be really helpful would be kind of standardizing. I saw you had on there like classes that they could offer their employees. So I think like a standardized curriculum, because a lot of employers maybe are totally willing to do this kind of stuff, but they don't have awesome staff like Josh at the university, or some other employers have dedicated transportation folks. But many of them, probably just have an HR person who's going to be giving out the transportation option. So if the city could develop appropriate curriculum, I think that might be really helpful to employers. And then as far as how do we define downtown, I think about downtown, I think more broadly than maybe the Downtown Neighborhood Association boundaries are. So in my mind, that kind of maybe goes all the way to the university and maybe like down to 18th or 24th or so, just where there's like a really tight grid. Maybe it's like a mile from like the middle of downtown, because like our downtown's pretty small, and I would hate to see this program be 10 square blocks or something like that, because there's really a lot of Eugene that's super walkable, super bikeable, and we have a really good network down there. And I don't think that in the context of what we're talking about, walking, half mile or biking a mile is outside the scope of what we're asking people to do. So I'd want to see an expanded vision of what downtown is rather than the actual neighborhood boundary.
So we had Alan, then Sue, then Mary.
I don't know, we're just referring to downtown core. Or, okay, good. If we're talking about all areas or programs or just the downtown core. But one thing that I see that's missing has to do with the timing of transportation, and our roads are only good as their maximum capacity. And so to the extent that we can spread out traffic during different times of the day means that we can use what we have better. And so I would like to see something added, some kind of incentives to be able to, with the larger employers especially, to encourage staggered work hours that are not 9 to 5 or other kind of common times, so that we're using the roads better.
Thank you.
Sue?
Yeah, as far as what area to include in downtown, it sort of seems like the bike share area is sort of encapsulates most of what we're talking about, and that might be a good connection. Just use the boundaries of the area that bike share currently addresses, which is the university and, you know, close in areas. I would encourage you to look. I went on a tour of the Northwest Credit Union building it's built, you know, near the courthouse. It was built a few years ago. And I was really impressed with what they offered to try to encourage active transportation. So they had a number of things. One of the things that occurs to me in particular is someplace to put all your junk when you, especially if you come in and it's raining and you've got wet clothes and packs and stuff, and it's kind of a mess. And you're trying to, you know, be professional. If there's some way that you can have a place to put all that, it would help to normalize it, because then when you know, it's like, yes, we recognize that you're going to have these needs, and therefore, you know, we're going to give you a place, someplace to let your gear hang to dry, and you can look presentable when you come in. But I think you're also, you know, I don't know how many employers we're talking about, but I think this will be very daunting to any employer to see this massive list of things that they're supposed to choose from. So if it's a small enough number of organizations that you can walk through it and say, you know, and point out, you're really already doing this one. This one is easy. We're going to provide you the materials. You just need to make it available to people, you know, to walk them through it, because I think it will be pretty frightening and intimidating from at the start.
Thank you, Sue. Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of options, and we'll have to really talk with folks. And also, we want to make sure that businesses are getting credit for what they're already doing, because there are some businesses that already have transportation options programs, as you were just talking about, and so we're in touch with some of those, and we want them to get credit.
I saw Mary, then Josh, then Steve.
Great. I was wondering, Cass, is there any, so if you're working with employers that have over 100 employees first, is there any kind of a standard, like letting them know if you have 100 employees, then our initial standard is that 25% of them or 50% of them are using some form of active transportation? I don't know. I guess my thinking is, here's where I'm going with this, is that I feel like sometimes we encourage and we cajole and we set up programs, but I think we fall short on just asking people to use active transportation, like really asking them and expecting them to. And so if we had goals, or if people were asked to look at what is, you know, what they're going to do for active transportation, the employers, the employees, you know, like here's I don't know. I just think there's a little bit more that we can do as far as saying, hey, at our business, we're really making our first goal to have 25% of people do it. See what you can do, you know, and asking people to commit to something, being just a little more proactive. So I guess my question is there any kind of a standard that you're, or a goal that you're providing for them in terms of percentages of people who would be using active transportation?
Yeah, I don't think those percentages haven't really been established, and they would, of course, change over time. You want to keep, the goal once it's met to have a new goal. And it may depend on geographic location within the city. So yes, I think that that's something that we absolutely need to think about. And many cities do in setting their goals for a business, but it usually isn't sort of across the board in that way, like 25% for all businesses, with over 100 employees. Very often they'll have a transportation survey. You get a sense of where the company is at, and then you work with them to achieve a goal. And then 2 years later, you work with them to achieve another goal. But the goal setting is definitely important.
But it's more individualized, which sounds appropriate. And, maybe there could be some standards, like the city is always trying to go for the gold or platinum or whatever. Maybe there's that kind of a rating for businesses as well that they're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. Yeah, we should celebrate those businesses that are doing well.
Thank you.
Josh, then Steve, then Andrew.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this. I've had the opportunity to be in a couple of these interview groups before, representing the university, and this is an exciting program for Eugene. Just a few comments on bike share as the boundary is actually a really interesting suggestion. I wouldn't necessarily use their exact boundary, but that was developed with the feasibility study based on different factors like access to transit and population density. And it would definitely be more mapping work than just like picking an existing boundary. But I think it would be really interesting to use those areas to sort of more broadly define what downtown is, because those would also be the places best positioned to implement this. So that might be an interesting way to go. As you get out of like the core of downtown or the university, I think letting businesses group together to fulfill some of these requirements, like not every place is going to be able to put in showers, especially if you're like a 5-person office. But if there's some way that you can pool resources with close businesses or residences, that might be great. And then talking to the ATC committee, something the program subcommittee did a couple of years ago was to help businesses become Travel Oregon bike-friendly businesses. And so there may be a role for ATC to help the rollout with this, to help businesses walk through the application process when it is available, because it's not just checking a box for the city, it's also helping us achieve our goals as a committee. So that's something to look forward to for the future. Thanks.
Let's have Steve, then we haven't heard from Pete yet, and then Andrew.
Cass, I'm not sure if I saw secure bike parking on the list, but that certainly is a big barrier for cycling commuters. And I think for the big employers, it's something that's fairly easy for them to provide. They probably have the real estate for that. For mid to smaller employers, it's a challenge. They may not have the space, the real estate, or the funds. And that's a role that the city could become heavily involved in, I would think, providing the service because they have the right of way, possibly the funding. So even attended secure bike parking would be a big boon, I would think. The other questions that came to mind here, and they're not specifically answering your questions, but it'd be helpful to know kind of some of the underlying assumptions in the modal split that was shown for 2035. And also, I don't know how much of the traffic on the streets is driven by commuters going to work. I'm sure it's quite a bit, but I'm also sure there's a lot that isn't, that is other types of trips. So I'd be curious to know how and when that sort of demand management is going to be addressed as well.
Pete?
It sounds like a really interesting project here. One of the things that kind of come to mind when talking to people out in the community about active transportation and getting commuting and doing all these things. I talked to a lot of people who, they bike oftentimes for economic reasons, that they're trying to save up for something, and having cars are, to be honest, a premium good, if you will. But a lot of people are, they're doing active transportation, like walking, biking, taking transit. They're trying to save money, and they go, I will take a car if I can, because it's more convenient, I think the thing that really has to be looked at, how do you make it more convenient so that people really, they will have a desire to do that, because right now all the incentives as it were are set up to drive, because if the parking is pretty cheap, when I lived in Seattle, for example, a lot of people took transit to get downtown because parking was incredibly expensive. So I hate to say this, I like there's a lot of nice positive things on the list, but sometimes there might need to be some kind of economic incentive to move people to go, maybe walking, biking, or taking the bus might be a good idea. Well, just my 2 cents there.
Thanks, Pete.
Andrew.
I certainly.
Please.
Thanks, Pete. I definitely agree, and financial incentives are very important incentives, and so that is certainly one of the things that Nelson Nygaard is looking at. Also, how this relates to parking is really important, and so that's also a consideration. Thank you.
Sorry to chime in again. I was just going to say Mary's comment made me start to think about if you all don't have a survey, like a standardized survey that the city sends out every year as one of the options, or maybe some kind of required option, or working into the tier so that we get a good response rate. But I wasn't thinking from the perspective of like employers meeting a target. I think it's going to be really important for the city, given the kind of big menu, to get data on how well this is actually working, right? I mean, we can put a program out, we can put effort into it, but if we're not actually achieving anything, then we should know that so we can change things. And I think over time, we might find that some of the options, right, like you could even start to correlate, employers that are downtown and offer whatever service out of this giant menu of things, those ones are the most effective. So we're actually going to narrow the list, or maybe, we haven't quite put things in the right tier, so we need to mix it around. And if we don't have good information on how well this is actually shifting behavior, I don't think we're going to be very effective in managing the program in the long term. So I'd be really interested in how you all can work in data collection so that you can continue to refine this work in the coming years.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I think that's going to be really important. This is a new program. So both in the beginning, guiding employers to choose options that, at least in our professional opinion, are likely to be a better option for where they're located, et cetera, is going to be important. And then also potentially adjusting those over time, that, when an employer says, I'm doing this is the thing that I'm choosing, that we might reach a point where we need to change that. And we also might find out that some of these strategies just don't work very well. So it will be important to be able to have some sort of malleability in the list as we're getting feedback that perhaps there is a new list every couple of years or something like that.
So yeah, so transportation is far and away Lane County's biggest contribution in terms of greenhouse gases, and a lot of that comes from from trucking, and a lot of that comes from trips to the hardware store, but a big piece of that is commuting. And I think the biggest piece that is missing here is the incentive structure and the metrics. So obviously measuring the outcomes of what's happening here. I think that if we're working with businesses to do what's comfortable, we're not going to hit any sort of reasonable goal. If we just allow people to do what's comfortable, then we're going to just continue to see accelerating climate change. This is an uncomfortable process, and it needs to be an uncomfortable process. I think that we have the ability to at least set goals. We know we want to see vision zero, right? We want to see no road deaths. We also want to see a carbon neutral county, and how much of the transportation sector can bring us down to carbon neutral, and how big of a piece of the transportation sector is commuting. And then, okay, what does that mean in terms of the breakdown and of how many people are commuting by car alone to your organization? So if you have 100 people doing it, we need to cut that down, drastically. So this is the number of people that we need to stop driving alone. How are we going to get there? Even if it's not perfectly measured because we don't have all of the tools, I think that we can set goals. And if we're enforcing them equitably, I think that the city can have a really good, like a place to come from, because I'm not sure what else will work, because we can't necessarily have, financial incentives at the city program level, but what will get people to change in a way that is meaningful? Sue?
Yeah, I absolutely agree that I think we're very good at offering carrots and kind of hesitant to offer sticks. And I to actually offering people options if they're not looking for any reason and if they have no reason to change, you're not really going to accomplish anything much. So I agree there has to be some teeth in it. I was also, in terms of financial incentives, I was wondering if there's any way to tie in health insurance providers, because if I would think that it would be possible for a company to reduce their, the cost of their benefits for their health, for their employees. I'm assuming most of these companies over 100 employees probably do provide health insurance. And if you achieve a certain level of your your employees using active transportation, I would think they would be healthier and maybe your premiums could go down. So I was wondering if there's any way to incorporate that into the program, or at least get them involved in the conversation.
Yeah, Sue, so that's a really good point. Of course, one of the really huge benefits of active transportation, as we all know, is health. And with insurance premiums being so high, this is one of the reasons that businesses like these programs. There have been individual cases where employers have reported savings on their health insurance premiums, but there haven't, to my knowledge, necessarily been bigger studies about this. So I think that that's going to be a side benefit of this work, and not quite sure how to sell that point yet, but hopefully we can figure that out along the way.
Go for it, Josh.
Yeah, I'm just sort of piggybacking on sort of what Sue was saying, and touching on what Pete was talking about Seattle. I think the stick is unfortunately somewhat important. There was a really interesting graph, and I'm trying to find it, but it was sort of looking at ridership across cities with great networks of, bike infrastructure, transit systems and stuff. And you look at these graphs over time, and they're still, the ridership is still decreasing. The only one that was increasing over a period, I don't know if it's still true with the pandemic, but at least pre-pandemic, ridership was increasing in Seattle when they put in that congestion pricing, when they was making it harder for people to drive. And there was that economic incentive. So even if you make, these bike lanes really nice, you make transit really appealing, people might not come just because of that. I think there was also something, there was an interesting documentary about Dutch biking, and they were asking the people, why do you bike? Do you really like biking? It's no, I don't really like biking, but it's just the simplest option. I'd rather drive. But just because it's more inconvenient for me to drive, I don't do it. So I think we really need to, unfortunately, it sounds weird, but we have to make driving less convenient.
Thanks, Josh. Yes. Sometimes we're unaware of, the water we're swimming in, and we're swimming in water where cars have been greatly incentivized. Car usage has been greatly incentivized, and sometimes we don't realize all the incentives that have been given. Currently, the city council doesn't have an approach that has an orientation towards disincentivizing driving. And so as staff, I'm not sure that we can necessarily go down that avenue. But that is, I would say that that's probably how our focus is mostly on incentives right now.
Okay, Cass, follow-up question. What would it take to get staff around to that idea?
What would it take to get staff around?
What would it take? Yeah, so you say that staff's orientation is not to make driving harder, but to make biking and transit and walking more appealing.
No, city council's orientation.
City council, thank you.
Yeah, so as the policy setters, that is my understanding of where they are. And so, what we're drawing from in this work is really the transportation system plan and some of the climate work that is being done in the city. And while all of that is saying that, we need to increase our transportation options and the number of trips that we're taking using active transportation, we need to decrease the amount of driving that we're doing. None of that it does not focus on disincentivizing those things right now. And it's, again, it's the water that we're swimming in. Can we elevate, can we make the convenience factor, can we really increase that convenience factor for people through, having better infrastructure around their places of work, at their housing, and around town as they go from business to business? Can we make that easier for people? Is where we're putting our focus right now, just based on those plans. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's still a couple areas of this that I want to cover here. I'm actually going to show you my slides because some of them are mysteriously not showing up. What I want to share with you firstly is, while we're talking about employers, is this one. In looking at, what is downtown and the university, you can see on this slide to the right what that area covers. In Nelson Nygaard's current look at things, although that may change, they are looking at what it would be like to extend that boundary out to 18th, because you can see all of those businesses in yellow there that are outside of what would be considered the downtown or University of Oregon area. And then on the left-hand side, you can see where some of the employment centers are, where we have employers of that have 100 or more employees at a site. So you can get a sense for that. I also want to show you this. So this is what it looks like as we begin to take the number of qualifying employers and employees and look at what the coverage is like. So we're talking about this program over 5 years, reaching about 21% of employers, which covers about 64% of employees. So this project also covers transportation options related to new development. And this is, in terms of what it covers, it would cover any development that's asking for a parking reduction or a parking increase. And also looking at any development that might fall within a certain square footage or number of units. And so I'm kind of going to go through some of these slides a little faster since we've got a little less time, and then we'll have more time for questions. So when you look at new development, starting at, going from years 1 to 5 and starting at 25,000 square feet, the larger group here, and then going down to 10,000 or 20 units. And so this is an example of what that might look like. And here, this would be a multifamily housing facility where we've got new development that is they have chosen which programs and sort of infrastructure pieces that they're wanting to offer. And it could include, all of those same things that we saw before, the travel surveys, the transportation coordinator. In this case, adding unbundled parking, so covered bike parking, on-site storage, and transit passes, and childcare in this case. So there are a variety of things that the developers could choose to do. And just like before, having a sort of menu of options where they become increasingly difficult or increasingly challenging, so that, not everybody is choosing the most basic things. And so, there's some discussion, to be had here about, for new development, programs that would move the needle. Of course, I showed you an example in this case, but, that's only a few ideas. So if you have others, I'd like to hear them. And then, of course, what sort of services the city could provide. We need to think about those, what the city could provide to make this process a little bit easier. And I want to talk about that, but I'm at this point going to ask that we save the discussion till the end, just so I can get through some of these other things here, and then we'll just have everything on the table. So transportation options for multifamily housing. So this would be existing housing and encouraging multifamily housing buildings to have such programs that would encourage their tenants to use active transportation for getting around. And this is an area that's going to require some more research. And so we're looking at, starting with a kind of pilot program with a number of buildings, including at least one affordable housing site, and try, some programs and various supports, and see kind of what works, and then report back to council about the results of that, because this is an area where there is certainly some research and some work being done, but we need to find out what works here locally. And so we'll be doing some exploring on this. Some more discussion questions. How do we motivate housing complexes to participate in such a program, to just try it out, and what kinds of programs, options for tenants that you all might like to see. So we've talked a little bit about program support that the city could potentially offer. So that can include, materials, education programs, classes, gamification, contests, just like we do around Get There. As we have, we could do work around Bike Month in May. But of course, we'd also offer monitoring support, surveying participants, setting those goals in relationship with the city's goals for meeting our climate targets, and potentially doing site visits, consultations, things like that. I'd also like to hear if you have more ideas on that as well. And then just lastly here, I just want to give you a sense of overall where we're at. As I said before, we started in September of 2020, and we are at the final recommendation stage. That's still under draft. We are a little bit behind schedule here, so we're going to be flexing into probably late August, early September on this. But it is right around the corner. And this is the contact info for the project leads on this project. But I also welcome any questions or ideas that you guys might have right now.
Suthinsky?
Yeah, for the multifamily housing, I have always thought, that we should have the, that you rent your parking space separate from your unit, so that, you can reduce your rent if you don't need to park your car, or maybe you could rent your parking space to somebody else who, it's, I think that would help a lot to encourage, to make people at least consider not using a car. And then having car share available easily, so that, because even if you use a car rarely, you still have to park it somewhere. So it's, so if you really could have access to a car without actually owning one, that would make a lot of difference, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, Cass, you asked about what are some things that might incentivize multifamily unit developers to, engage in the program. And we probably timeline on permitting and that sort of thing. Those incentives have probably been exhausted in the past, but I'm thinking oftentimes what happens to developers who are trying to meet some of our goals, some of the city's goals are to do compact multi-unit development, and then that runs afoul of other neighbors that are not happy about seeing increasing density, and it becomes a difficult process for the developer. So my thought here is that if a developer is proposing things that really meet the city's goals in a number of ways, climate goals, transportation goals, there might be some kind of a rating system that the city can use to promote or publicize the nature of that development so that it has the effect of maybe lessening some of the neighborhood resistance that always springs up and is quite a thorn in the side of developers.
Thanks, Steve. When you say a rating, would you say a little bit more about that? Like a rating that the city would give the development to say, they're doing a good job at meeting these goals of our whole city?
There are LEED standards, gold, platinum, that those are things that everybody understands. And so it gives kind of a halo effect to a development, deservedly or not. And the city has goals, and maybe come up with a system that says this meets 100% of our requested transportation demand management goals, or whatever it might be, so that it helps, again, helps with the halo effect for the neighboring area.
Yeah, I certainly hear the concern about the interaction between development and the surrounding neighbors. And one of the more recent problems has been around unbundled parking that we had out in the River Road area, a development that unbundled the parking, and many tenants have decided to basically just, rather than pay for parking, just park out on the street, which has resulted in a more crowded street than the residents nearby are used to. And so figuring out a way to do unbundled parking that doesn't have that sort of off effect around the neighborhood will be really important. Whether that means, setting up a parking district or something like that. Not really sure, but yeah, that's one of the challenges, and there are others too, not just parking. Yeah.
Josh and then Sue.
Yeah, I would just say on new development, there has to be a way after the development is complete to check and make sure people have actually implemented the TDM requirements. And maybe that's picked up in sort of the current employers and current multifamily housing. But what we've seen in the past with sort of MUPTI exemptions for improvements is those improvements don't materialize, and then the city doesn't really have a great ability to force those improvements. So I don't know if that's outside the scope of the project, but something to consider.
So do you mean by the end of the project, Josh, that those intentions haven't been met?
Well, so let's say you approve a new multifamily development and they unbundle parking, and 2 years later they bundle parking back up again. What is the enforcement mechanism? And it's not just that one item, but let's say they stop doing many things on the list.
Yes. Yeah. So yes. So even after they receive their certificate of occupancy, they have people living there, and then they change the rules. Okay, yeah, that's really important. So some ongoing monitoring will be needed.
mean, presumably they would have to apply for a permit to do that, because there'd be like, what, they'd have to raise something, or they'd be like fallow land that they'd be paving over or something. Because it's not like the parking exists unless they built it and unbundled it. Is that how does unbundled working otherwise?
So unbundled just generally means that the tenant would pay separately for their parking. And so they could choose simply not to pay for a parking spot.
But the spot is
have a
still
lower
there.
rent. Potentially. Normally, though, developers would be incentivized to do that so that they can reduce the cost of the project. And so they're motivated to have fewer parking spots as well.
Sue, right?
Actually, I think Mary had her hand up
Oh,
first.
please, yeah.
Oh, okay. I was thinking in the resources that you provide to, well, okay, I guess I'm back to businesses. I might be out of line here, but maybe it applies. The resources, maybe there could be, one of the resources could be a letter that they send out to, I guess, the occupants of a building or the employees that says, hey, this is what we're doing and this is why, and this is something that's more, that again, asks them to participate. And maybe if that's provided for them as a resource, that would be, maybe you're already doing that, but I think that could be good. And then I was wondering, I have a question about the capacity of the transportation options staff or city staff to work with the individual buildings or businesses and multi-use people and all that, maybe that hasn't been established yet, but I think that's an important component of it. Do you have any information about that?
I appreciate your question, Mary. This is a lot of work. We will need more staff in order to do this. Cities around the country who do this kind of work, they have dedicated staff that do the monitoring, that run the programming that is being offered citywide, who produce the materials and do the consultations, et cetera. And so these recommendations, coming from Nelson Nygaard, we'll take them to City Council. If City Council agrees that we should move forward on them, we would need staff budgeted to make this happen.
Sue,
Yeah, okay. One thing that occurs to me, this might be kind of counterintuitive, but I have heard developers complain about, unless the parking code has changed, they're required to provide a certain amount of bicycle parking for their multi-unit development, which is kind of difficult and awkward. They work to do it, and then it goes unused because the tenants don't feel comfortable leaving their bike in that common room. They take their bikes up to their own apartments. And so maybe if that is still an issue, maybe you could give them a little slack on that if they do other things that work, so in other words, you could give them an incentive to participate in things that are more effective and tell them they don't have to build this common shared bike parking area that nobody uses.
Anything else to talk about?
Well, maybe we just need more ATC members who lived in a variety of multifamily dwellings. I think a lot of us are homeowners and are sort of guessing at some of these issues.
So related to that, Sue, you know, an important part of this is really talking to end users in order to design programs that are actually going to work. And so that's an important part of this process as well. Well, I thank you all for your time today and your good ideas. I'm glad that we got them down. We will pass them on to the consultant, and thank you.
Thanks.
Yes. So next we have liaison reports. So is this Bryce or Steve?
I guess I can go with BPAC in Springfield. Not too much to report. At some point, I'll probably talk to Steve. We are discussing etiquette, especially with e-bikes, path etiquette in general. I know you guys are doing some of that too. So that's kind of the main thing that may be of interest to you guys. Other than that, we're still just kind of going over our subcommittees on where to put bike parking, like racks, and doing a survey of what's out there, that kind of thing. So I'll email with Steve, see what you guys have as far as any plans for bike etiquette with the public, because that is definitely something we want to take on pretty soon here.
Hey, Bryce, can you tell us about the D Street corridor, where the planning for that stands?
I'm not sure. It came up in our last meeting, which was, Tuesday. But as far as the actual progress on it, I'm not really sure. That seems to be kind of a contentious thing. A lot of people want more, but there's funding issues, and COVID has messed with things. So I'm not all that clear on where all that is. I don't know that we are all that clear on it. So,
okay.
Sorry about that.
I'll keep inquiring, because it's a major connection between Eugene and Springfield.
Yes, and I will see if I can find anything out on that and let you guys know.
Okay.
All right, now we have subcommittee reports. Do we have anything from the infrastructure subcommittee?
I was hoping Josh would report out, because he's been putting all the effort into organizing the meetings, and so he should definitely get credit.
Sure, I can go ahead if yeah. So we met on Tuesday, I guess it was. And one of the things I think we're converging on is that we'd like to look at some of the projects that have been performed under the current TSP, sort of looking at success stories in that context. But also, and this is sort of maybe related to some of the discussion we had earlier, but just sort of maybe revising the TSP a bit, or figuring out ways that the Active Transportation Committee could make suggestions to city staff on how future document could be revised. I think there's several points that have been identified that are perhaps outdated or obsolete. So that's sort of the general one of the main themes we've talked about. Sort of more specifically, I'm actually reporting on two infrastructure meetings, just because our last one, the one in July, happened after the main ATC meeting. So we also at that point met with Reed, who asked for some input on a number of smaller projects or developments that are happening around the city. If anybody else has anything to add, please jump in, but that's sort of the gist of it at this point.
I'll add, and this might be a bit of a surprise to Anne, but we talked about how to work with university students, and particularly Live Move, in the coming year, in relation to those projects that have been completed on the TSB, so that we have some data about how they performed or didn't perform. So I look forward to having some conversation with you, Anne, about that in the coming weeks.
That sounds great. It's gonna be a great project or projects.
All right, Mary, could you tell us about programs?
Yes. Let's see. We had several topics. We talked about safety and compliance along 13th Avenue, and Josh Kay with his U of O hat joined us and talked about what they're doing at the university in terms of outreach and education and encouragement with students. And the city shared some of their thinking too. Steve voiced concern again about the crossing 13th at Pearl Street and High, but especially Pearl Street. And there was some discussion about signage. And I think the city is also considering different signage along 13th to make it more safe and to educate people. And Steve had a specific suggestion about saying that there's a bike light coming up, because you can't really see it, the one on Pearl as you're heading south. And so having a sign there that said that there is an upcoming bike light. And I think the city has also thought about that. So he forwarded that to Shane at the city, that specific idea about that specific signage. And we all supported that. We all thought that was a great idea. We talked, we want to do maybe something with the riverfront opening, and that has been delayed. So our efforts there are on hold currently. We are talking with 4J a little bit about some things, the walking school bus idea. We've been in contact with Sarah Mazie from Safe Routes to School. They want to do walking school bus, and we want to see how we can support that effort. So we're in the loop on that, and it's not something that's going to start right away. She's trying to decide when they're going to start it, where they're going to start it, but we're looking to see how we could possibly support that. And also helping with, some of us are going to help organize a walk audit around North Eugene High School, because that's got a lot of traffic concerns there. And so we thought that would be a good next step in order to think about addressing those problems. Somebody brought up bike parking at schools and where that stands right now. And Shane told us about an assessment tool that Safe Routes to School uses. And we need to ask Sarah about how the different schools are doing. They've got a rating, and they've got some goals around that. So he wasn't sure exactly where that is right now, but we're going to follow up on that. Shane filled us in on path etiquette, the efforts the city has been doing with tabling, signage, and striping. And we had a little more conversation about valet bike parking, because we wanted to know where that stands. And Shane filled us in on the fact that CAT is folding and Cascadian Mobility is going to be taking this over. And he filled us in also about the developments with that building that the Center for Appropriate Transport was in. So I think that the things that we are moving forward with right now are the different 4J, things. We're going to keep looking at the riverfront. We've got things kind of on the back burner and some active things. And I think there were some ideas that came up tonight that maybe we can take a look at too. Anybody else? Did I miss anything?
So the communications subcommittee, so there's going to be a project coming up possibly around Danabo Elementary. And we discussed some ways that we could reach out to folks in the area to get their input. And I think kind of more broadly, how we can get more representation and feedback from folks that we don't typically hear from, especially places like North and West Eugene. And then tied to that is ATC recruitment, which will be coming up soon. The other piece is other, yeah, kind of other like next topic to pursue. The 4J, new projects, North Eugene changes, and the potentially getting them to commit to some climate goals with their new building. Potentially looking at Eugene's response to the middle housing code changes and the newer active transit corridor improvements. And finally, we have some time for any information share and project updates from staff or members. Feel free to popcorn or raise your hand. Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, I'll just amplify what Bryce said about the etiquette issue in Springfield. It seems like, we at HCC, we hear about this just about every meeting. We hear from people that say we have problems with speed and we have problems with behavior. And they're hearing the same thing at BPAC in Springfield. And so it's, it's classic. Two heads are better than one. It seems like a great opportunity for us to put our collective minds together. So I'm just requesting from Shane and Cass and whoever's involved in the current program at the city, just reach out to Emma and Bryce and share what you're learning. And let's get the best learnings from both groups and put it to work.
Will do.
I've been trying to announce this in every venue I have an opportunity for. The University of Oregon is going to be adopting LTD's new fare pass system, UMO, for students and employees this fall. So that's really exciting for us because we're going to get a lot of data about our community that we didn't have before. And for the, I'm sure, hundreds of alumni who are watching this and riding the bus with your ID card, that will no longer be an option. So you'll have to start paying for fare again.
I'll add that the Electric Bike Expo is happening on August 27th, Friday night at the Campbell Community Center in the parking lot there. We're gonna have a number of local shops and makers and local folks basically sharing their personal bikes and their stories. I encourage everybody to come out and if you have an e-bike and are interested in sharing it, let me know. And I'd like to add you to the volunteer list.
I'm sorry, Cass, what's the time and date and place for that?
So that is Friday night, August 27th. It's from 5 to 8 p.m. at the Campbell Community Center.
So I'll jump in. You may or may not have noticed that I am here instead of Lee Shoemaker this evening. He has formally announced his retirement. So I will actually be taking over as the new staff liaison between city staff and you wonderful people of the ATC. So I apologize if there's been any hiccups in this transition period, but hopefully we can continue to smooth it out and everything will be smooth sailing. So I look forward to being your liaison.
Is there going to be some kind of celebration or appreciation for Lee?
I think that's still TBD, but there's definitely a lot of good sentiment around wanting something like that.
Normally when people leave the ATC, they get a certificate and some sort of mug. So if we could arrange for that, that'd be great.
Anyone else?
I guess I'll also add, as a follow-up to Karen's announcement, is that this is an excellent time to kind of assess with Lee's retirement, kind of just to reflect on ATC and how it's been feeling to you all. And so next month we might have an agenda item just to kind of discuss.
Yeah, we were toying around with an agenda item about meeting in person again, and we should probably at least address that again soon.
That's all I was going to mention. But of course, with the current Delta spike, I think we can probably put that back on the table.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for braving the heat to be here with us this evening. Karen, thank you for getting us organized beforehand, and Cass, thank you for handling the Zoom and also presenting at the same time. Amazing.
Thanks for bearing with me.
So we'll see you all next month.
Bye.
Hey, everyone.
Bye.